Top Lobster Productions.
Still, as the official narrative goes, and the as far as just the corroborated background of the group itself and the members and their perspective on Vernon Howell and David Koresh, this is how the story goes. And so it's, again, according to other members of the group, David would issue a challenge to people after returning, and he would say, "This book is sealed with 7 seals. No man can reveal it. I wonder if you might let me show you."
Frozen over, the cold still burns underneath my skin. The water is rising all around me, and there is nothing left I can give. All these tears I shed, I saw the wildfire spread. You said you cheated, God, but heaven was in my hand. They say the good die, no use in saying what is done, it's done, 'cause it's not enough. Now when the night gets high, it's like a brand new day.
That many of the people in the residence were homicide victims.
Hey guys, it's Jose Galison. Welcome to another No Way Jose. We're doing an episode on the Waco Weirdness with Austin Picard. By that, I mean this is a follow-up to our recent Waco episode we did. And with going into the Waco episode, we kind of went back through it with new eyes. At least Austin did more particularly. So there was a lot of new, kind of not regularly treaded information, or maybe seen under new eyes to have new use. And so, but we figured as we were covering it in our, since that was the original, or last time we covered it was meant to be a 32nd, I believe, anniversary. And it just felt not appropriate to really be kind of treading over. It would have made it like a way too long of an episode. Plus, it just kind of felt like, just for the sake of what we were trying to do, just an anniversary episode, kind of stick to the main points, maybe a little bit new stuff-ish. But then we decided we'd take it another separate episode and really dive into that, and that's what we're doing here. But before we get into that, I do need to take a moment to pay the bills and let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at NWJ. If you're tired of that razor burn, the irritation, those ingrown hairs that come from those multi-blade cartridges, this is the way to go. It's superior in every way to that multi-blade scam. This gives you a much smoother shave, and it's much better for your skin. It is a single blade safety razor. You're dragging one blade across your face, so it's jacking your skin up way less. It's also a lot cheaper, fraction of the price. It's $75 for the first year, and that gives you the razor handle seen here with a box of 100 blades. After that, you're just buying blades. It's also a COVID mandate refusing company, so it's a company that doesn't hate your guts. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you can get 10% off if you use Jose at checkout. But with that, let's go ahead and get into the show. Let's get Austin in here, and let's get to it. What's up, brother? How you doing?
Buddy, man. I do want to start out by saying, first off, is obviously, like, with the narrative that we're kind of going to pursue and at least fall down this strange rabbit hole in terms of Waco itself and this alternative theory. What's very interesting to me is that the ultimate conclusion remains the same. This still is ultimately one of the all-time best examples of what your government is capable of, right? And so, like, at the end of the day, no matter if the kind of our original starting point from just the recent anniversary episode where we covered the basics and really illustrated the foundational principles of what mattered most in terms of Waco. Like, this is not at all, in my mind, casting any shadow over the victims in a negative way. I think if anything, it would be providing us an optimistic window into reinforcing the reality of this very strange clandestine network that, as we continue to spotlight and as far as within the context of our research, it really does. This almost proves positive of our strange Gladio
Literally
all-encompassing
everything is
theory.
Gladio.
Yes, brother. Like, I know that this isn't this is not something that I initially intended to ever consider. And again, this is a newly found alternative theory, so, and not at all something that I went out of my way to pursue. Like, it fell into my lap due to my natural process of tugging at those threads of investigative interest, and inevitably, I wound up in the dystopian land of mind control, right? Which unfortunately seems to be all too often reoccurring in my life. But
Which I guess that kind of works as a good bridge into, I think, where we want to start, which is kind of, I think a lot of, me and you, we kind of claw at the veil a lot of the time with our research. I think, when we talk about demon possession, that might be, what was MK Ultra was in the past, so I think, so it's worth analyzing the woo-woo at hand here with the Branch Davidians and some of the stuff with Koresh's past. I know namely he did, from my recollection, take a trip to Israel and then come back, and that's when he decided to change his name from, I think, Vernon Howell to David Koresh. Obviously, we talked last episode about the symbolic significance of all of that, but it is like it just kind of seems like there's some sort of root here, which, when you do get into these weird, obviously we already said it, Gladio, there does seem to be, when you get to the tippy top of these things, weird. I mean, once you start getting a little bit of the monarch blurring in there, you get some weird esoteric occult stuff going on here that you're like, I don't know what the hell this is. So, I mean, when you start going further, you start learning Kabbalah type stuff. And now we're talking about some dude in some sort of cult that's going to Israel and getting information revealed to him. And call me crazy. Maybe I'm a little bit conspiratorial here. But my head starts a pinging when I see these sorts of things. So since the last time we touched on that a tiny bit in our last episode, but is there anything in this realm that you feel like there bears significance rehashing before we get into some of the other things? Because this is obviously the lead up before all of it. So, but it's like, I think this is important. Like, this is some sort of theological something, whether we want to be cynical, parapolitical, analyzers and be like, well, this is but like, I don't know whether it's woo woo or it's not. Something happened. What happened there? You know what I mean? So I think it honestly bears some significance.
This isn't as far into like the esoteric, sort of theoretical landscape as you might think. Like, honestly, what I've discovered is seemingly a very, very plausible alternative theory that seems to also play perfectly into the framework of what was being covertly pursued at the time, and considering this ties in even the Oklahoma City bombing, which I found very interesting as far as just like how they would potentially have
Patcom, baby.
Yeah, and also how they seemingly developed this device, this bomb that they also were attempting to dude, there's a very interesting aspect to that as well, which we'll get into, but there seems to be a tie-in which also brings in Timothy McVeigh very strangely, but of course there's something I discovered about his potential Manchurian candidate connections that I was unaware of until recently as well, which I thought you would be so fascinated by it, and if you hadn't already been exposed to it. But what I will say is that to begin with, By the way, you want to go all the way back to like the history of David himself, or Vernon, right? When he's when he's a young man, he's legitimately just
Yeah, who's his
let's
daddy? That's I mean, with all these weird breeding stuff going on with these Chloes, you're
yeah,
like, who the fuck's this dude's daddy? So obviously that's the
right,
starting point,
100%. Yeah, and by the way, his mother in '64 married a Marine by the name of Roy Haldeman. All right. And this was interesting to me. And I would like to look deeper into his personal connections, because it seems as if, um, you know, that this would put them in a very disruptive, chaotic position, and as far as like terms of his childhood. And so his real mother, by the way, wasn't even revealed to him, right? As far as like the truth about his real mother and things of that nature, until
Oh,
he's like
was
5 years old.
wasn't he like he thought he was his sister or something weird like
Yes,
that?
man.
Yeah,
It's such a crazy, and then so
I
this kind
forgot
of
about that.
stages his life experience in a very
Yeah.
interesting way. And so then uh to make this situation even worse. So it's at this time in his childhood when Koresh is said to have began to be sexually abused by one of his mother's male relatives. So
All right.
yeah, and so in July
Picking
of
up all the
1960,
patterns here.
exactly,
Yeah.
trauma-based mind control in a way, if not just traumatic child abuse, obviously, paving the way for some sort of yeah, psychological. Definitely, you're going to have a pattern that will yeah,
Well, I've been ranting on. I mean, I guess it'll be out by this time. The idea of monarch and how it might work. It just seems like the common theme is it's always like early life, something happens, crazy
mhm,
trauma, and then something. It's like later then they get activated, and it's like they're almost unwitting, like between the two, and they almost seem like these seem like two unrelated events, but somehow it ends
right,
up with the same result of. But it's like I don't know. I know we've theorized a little bit about like how there would almost need to be some sort of method of communication, and some of these weird like Temple of Set or the Church of Satan, like the structure of those entities kind of fill that role. But maybe also the same could be said of wherever the hell I don't know, David went in Israel. So
mhm,
like I
right,
don't know. That's the kind of thing, whatever happened to him as a young child with his mother's relative, and then then later in life, and he's like, are these things connected? Perhaps. And is that too
right,
schizo? I don't know. But once you've dug into the digging sort of things we've dug into, like the coded messages for elites to procure children and stuff that have
mhm,
like been kind of borne out, you're like, I think this is kind of how they operate.
yeah, no,
So
absolutely, and also it seems like he just had significant issues with his stepfather at that point as well. So like to me that strikes me as being something worthwhile in pursuing further in some sort of fashion, and just as far as research is concerned. And then also one other thing worthwhile in mentioning just before we get further into kind of the alternative theory we want to present, as well as that starting with that pilgrimage in '85, where he's witnessing visions. He's 19 years old, and he has an illegal sexual relationship with a 16-year-old girl who becomes pregnant, right? And so he never saw the resulting daughter, and then the teenage mother thought him unfit to be a father, so she moved away and refused to ever see him. So this is when he becomes or claimed to have become a born again Christian, and soon joined his mother's denomination, the Seventh Day Adventist Church. And so and then by the way, there's an additional interesting point there, because as he turns 20, uh man, he has a sexual relationship with the 15-year-old daughter of he begins a 2-year relationship with the daughter of his pastor. And during this courtship, he's apparently praying for guidance, and he states that none should want for her mate, right? And basically is telling the pastor and the father, right, that essentially um he says that it's really interesting because he's convinced this was a sign from God, apparently, Koresh, when he approached the pastor and told him that God wanted him to have his daughter for a wife. And that's when he's expelled from the church. So I found that part to be worth mentioning as well, before we get into more of, because again, it like also stages this strange issue he's already developed with you know, clearly he has some sort of proclivity for a younger mate, right? Which he's justifying in biblical scripture, which he claimed
I think really
that
it's a hurt
Koresh
people, hurt
allegedly,
people.
dude, yeah, he says he's praying for guidance during their courtship, and this is when he allegedly opens his eyes and found the Bible open to Isaiah 34:16, stating that none should want for her mate. And this is apparently what convinced him that it was a sign from God, and what led him to approach the pastor and her father and get him expelled from the church. So that kind of sets the path for David in a very strange way. And then David, of course, claiming visionary experiences, right? Which he reported to have experienced a vision when he went to Israel in 1985. And he claimed that he had visited heaven, was acknowledged by God as his son, and given the ability to see the true meaning of the Bible. And in 1990, that's when he filed a legal petition to change his name to David Koresh. And so, yeah, I found that interesting as well, because based on his visionary experience, Koresh claimed that he was the Lamb of Revelation, the only person who could unlock the 7 seals of Revelation. And in Revelation 6, the Lamb takes a book sealed with 7 seals out of the hand of the one on the throne, who is Christ in Koresh's interpretation, and opens it. In the future kingdom, the Lamb will be married. This will create a quartet of Father, Mother, Son, the Spirit in the flesh, Christ, the Lamb, and his wife, or perfect mate, who is also an extension of the Spirit. So apparently, it gets even more interesting, because the Branch Davidian, sort of their ideology, is structured in a way where this apparently this 2-horned beast, or lamb-like beast of Revelation, is the United States of America. And so that is where you have the United States being the primary player in the United Nations, according to the belief system that they were practicing, which they termed, quote, the Assyrian. And so in the Branch Davidian interpretation of the end times rapture, the Assyrian will enter the Holy Land in the last days and interfere in God's plans for Jerusalem. God will deal with the Assyrian, and everyone not willing to acknowledge God will flee the Holy Land. The Lord will then establish his kingdom on earth, with the 144,000 people with him at Mount Zion mentioned above. So that's exactly how you're dealing with, the modern Babylon, right? Is essentially what's occurring here, where you're seeing the ultimate, right, doomsday prophecy take place, as far as what essentially begins to happen is that Babylon will persecute God's people, and what
This is
Babylon
right after
becomes
coming back from Israel, right?
yes. And so the
It's like
prophecy,
obviously all three. I mean, between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, they all kind of they have like a dialectic when it comes to apocalypses. So it is kind of interesting. He goes to the Holy Land, and kind of have the same dialectic of kind of the same basic thing, same goal points, and he comes back, and now he's been has this hidden information, and is super set on this apocalyptic rebuilding of the temple and things of the like type stuff. So
yeah, he said basically God will deal with the Assyrian, and everyone not willing to acknowledge God will flee the Holy Land. But Babylon, essentially Babylon the Great, becoming as they believe to be this coalition of nations, or this one world government, right? And that is put together by the Assyrian and the 2-horned beast. So Babylon will persecute God's people, but God will provide a refuge for them. Eventually Babylon will fall. God will cast the 2-horned beast into the lake of fire, and then much later, after the millennium, the devil also apparently So yeah, the kingdom of God will never be destroyed allegedly after the millennium. But this is very interesting as far as this sort of this end times prophecy that's playing out in many ways, and is
Mhm.
sort of, as it justifies really what occurred at the time, in the minds of a lot of the Branch Davidians. Unfortunately, they believe they would be martyred by, and especially even by fire, which was very much a part of his prophecy itself, which I found interesting as well, and that it would be in the form of two separate attacks, which also I thought was very strange.
I mean,
But
in the Bible, they said that they'll never destroy us by water again. It'll be by fire the next time. So it checks out, yeah.
exactly, yeah. And I was listening to David Koresh's music earlier. I was like, "What?" It was so strange, man. But
Mostly
it
did
was
cover stuff, didn't he? I mean, come on.
well, no, I one of them was basically the book of Daniel, which I found
Okay.
interesting, and it was obviously the lyrics weren't
Well, good.
no, it was
I mean, I
definitely
don't know. I mean, Psalms, you could get away with that. Some Psalms you could make sound good, but
right,
I don't think it's some random other book. It's gonna come out good. It's sounding too good. But all right, so we're on the woo woo side of things. What more particularly in this realm you
yeah,
think's
yeah. So
meaningful?
essentially, again, Mount Carmel was considered this, man. This is very strange. Mount Carmel's considered both a training ground and haven, a place that prepared people to be able to go to Israel. Koresh's continued teaching of a baptism of fire, his apocalyptic theology of martyrdom, and this basically how Mount Carmel was sacred, and this all obviously played a role in the final events due to, of course, this clear reference to a baptism by fire, and anyway, so another thing that I thought was very interesting was, again, you had strange controversies, right, regarding their unorthodox lifestyle, but I felt like this is worth covering for a brief moment, and then we'll pivot. So check out this video. It is
Here we go.
this is crazy.
The question is, what am I doing? What am I doing with all these children? What's really going on here? Well, God is God, and this nation is supposed to
Is that too loud?
honor and serve God. It's
That's
just the
fine.
God we trust on our currency. And these children that I have are for a reason. And unless we really have the ear and the eyes to open ourselves up to be able to really read the scriptures and understand the prophecies and a lot of the seven seals, the explanation would seem almost foolish. But anyway, hopefully God's granting us time to be able to open these things up more thoroughly. And we just thought we'd kind of break the ice and allow people to see just exactly, what kind of people we have here.
You see that?
What's that?
Just that brief, I wonder, maybe he's tired, maybe he's in pain. He had been shot. This is during the siege.
You talking about just the kind of shifting of the body language? I mean, I didn't.
Yeah,
think
I'm just
I
like,
didn't think
how
much of
people
it.
nod out if they're drugged
Yeah.
in any sort of way. Like, it's just kind of a strange tell if you just
Yeah.
trail off. But it could be
Yeah.
many different
I
reasons.
mean,
He's
a lot
been
of
shot.
stress, tired.
You've
Yeah,
been-
he was
yeah,
shot. He was shot in the
100%.
initial assault.
Yeah, I'm
wasn't he?
thinking
Yeah.
he's just in pain at this moment,
Yeah.
right? Like, that would be. Did I start this from the beginning? By the way, I didn't
You
know
did
this.
start this from the beginning, yes.
Okay.
And we just thought we'd kind of break the ice and allow people to see just exactly, what kind of people we have here. I'd like to start off first of all with my oldest son. His name is Cyrus. How old are you? 7.
His
Say
name
hello
is
there.
Cyrus.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sounds great.
Buddy. Hi. Wave at him. There's a camera right there. Hey, Star. Show him Daddy's face. He's my love baby, right? Huh? Bobby's our little clown here. Wave at the camera, Bobby. Wave at the camera. Wave, there you go. This is my little one, Holly. Hollywood. Yeah. Dalen, how old are you? Huh? 3. Oh, she just turned 1 too, huh? Yeah, this is our little girl, Pages. She's sweetie, huh? She's an Australian baby. This one, we're fixing to have
That
another
was
one.
weird to
What
me.
does that mean?
Yeah, I know, right?
We should be having another one here in about a month.
That
huh?
was weird to me. Did you see that?
What's that?
She's you're getting to have, dude. This is weird right here. I mean, honestly.
In about a month, huh? Another one here pretty soon. So you should be having another one here in about a month, huh?
That is a young girl, man.
Say hello.
It's
Real
definitely
loud.
strange.
Hello. Okay. There's one thing about our children you'll find out is that they're taught faith in God. They may not know every doctrine. They may not know everything that we know. But they're taught that authority is based in maturity. They're taught to respect people. Her name is Serenity. Why? She's serene. Huh? How much you love Daddy? Show him how much. Boy, that's a lot. This is Serenity. These are Serenity's little sisters. These are the kids.
This
Hug
is
each other.
strange too.
These are the kids.
Weird.
It's good. Love, love.
I get it.
Here's the kicker. This is Chanel. She's our jumper. This is a very athletic little girl.
Very strange.
Say hello. Come on. Look over here. She's always fascinated with me. Oh. But anyway, this is my family, and no one's going to come in on top of my family and start pushing my family around. It's just not going to happen. Ain't going to happen. You come point guns in the direction of my wives and my kids, damn it, I'll meet you at the door any time. And I'm sorry some of you guys got shot. But, hey, God will have to sort that out, won't he?
That's pretty gangster, to be honest, right? You know,
It's one of
that
the
last
last lines
part.
from Waco.
Yeah. That was a pretty gangster line, but I will say that you have to admit, like, that is a strange video. Like that, I just sat there.
It's
Like,
weird.
hey man, you know, I'm just saying.
It's definitely disconcerting when you see how young some of those girls are, and you're like,
That's what I
"Jeez."
mean. Yeah.
And
Yeah, and
you're
keep
like,
this in mind.
How many fucking kids you got, dude? It just
Exactly.
keeps-
And well,
keeps
he had
coming.
17 different children.
Yeah.
By 8 different women, right? And that was by 93 that he had fathered 17 children. And his goal was apparently 24. His goal was to father 24 children.
Huh.
And so keep this in mind as well. This is something I found interesting. I was unaware of. But apparently he claimed this divine mandate, obviously, to take these spiritual wives from among the young women and girls. And so in 89, he began to teach that all women in the community, apparently, including those married to others, were his wives. All the men other than himself were to be celibate. And then he taught the Branch Davidians that he was to father 24 children. These children would be raised within the community and would eventually serve as the 24 elders spoken of in the book of Revelation who would rule during the millennium. Which, again, apparently among his spiritual wives was Michelle Jones, sister of Rachel, who was 12 at the time, and obviously below the legal age of consent. So that's what kind of raised a lot of people were very upset, clearly. And then another girl who I could not avoid in my research about Waco was that there had been legitimate allegations that were made by victims who had survived, right? Like surviving victims or victims who had fled the group before the siege ever took place, and made allegations about Koresh and the unorthodox lifestyle. You had family members who were extremely upset about, their families being destabilized and destroyed by David. And so it wasn't, yeah, everyone locally, the Branch Davidians were fine. They weren't causing any real problems. And but again, you have to consider the fact that there's obviously collateral damage here in terms of
Yeah.
the families involved, and in any of these unorthodox groups and organizations that exist, like that is the case.
So
It's basically
is what you're
yeah,
saying here is it's kind of like Jonestown, where
exactly.
there was lots of family members issues, or pulling off, kind of doing cult stuff, essentially doing the whole
Yeah.
these are what's subversives or whatever, or gray people, or whatever the different cult or group is. There's always like, these are the non-touchables, or whatever the term is, like, don't talk to these people.
Yeah.
And they do kind of separate, sequester them from the group. And so that's okay. That sounds like what you're saying. Okay, so it does. Obviously, there's going to be lots of parallels about Jonestown through this, probably,
100%.
but it's
And
obviously
I'm
like that's what
talking
Jonestown was building
covert
towards, too, so,
operatives
yeah.
directly comparing the two. Like knowing the facts of what we have outlined in our massive Jonestown series, right? And being of that very same mind, then going ahead and detailing the fact that this is a direct parallel, and here are the reasons, and blowing the whistle effectively when they're being targeted and their lives are in jeopardy, and their families are under protective orders by certain Navy SEALs that aren't compromised by the apparent covert network that's playing out in a very criminal enterprise established way that's very difficult to conceptualize for the average person who hasn't been introduced to many of these, right, investigative threads of interest that are far more credible than you would ever imagine, right? And that's what
for
I've
you
discovered.
good people out there, we've already, especially in this channel and on Austin's channel as well, at least on this channel particularly, there's pretty much anything we've mentioned, there's probably already a playlist that you can go find and find like a series on it or something, like we've done a Jonestown series. But I guess to refocus our digging into this, I think obviously if you have something else you want to reattack, you can redirect us there. But I figured we wanted to talk kind of about I kind of just talked about the MK Ultra with the woo woo side of things, but now I think we're gonna get into like kind of direct straight up MK Ultra type
100%.
overt implications. So
Yes, and keep in mind the reason that I mentioned the terrible allegations from some of the surviving victims or members that had left the group. One of the girls was Kiri Jewel, and she alleged that Koresh molested her sexually when she was only 10. And so you had, of course, you had members of the group who most of the women have been convinced or conditioned to believe that it was an honor to have a child with David, and that is real. That's never am I attempting to cast a negative light on the victims, right, in any way, but it's just the reality of this situation. It's very unorthodox and uncomfortable, and unfortunately, when you're dealing with these cult of personalities like a David Koresh, it's a reality that we're facing here. And I remember when I first approached this story, I wanted to run from that thread. I just it scared me. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, it was something that I didn't find anything that seemed credible enough to pursue at the time, but still I had stumbled upon something where I was like, whoa, in passing, what was that? And it always gave me pause. And so then, of course, in hindsight, knowing what I do now, obviously, as I've mentioned before, I would have entirely approached Waco in a different way, still inevitably resulting in a very similar conclusion, obviously, in my mind, morally and philosophically. But anyway, so I felt like that was something that needed to be said, and beyond that way we kind of at least balance out what we're presenting here as far as the alternative theory. But here's something that I think would be a fun way to kind of begin this, because this was something I discovered recently, going back through the Alex Constantine archives. He has a whole thread on the Oklahoma City bombing and a lot of different things, which are worthwhile in going through. And one is Gladio, psyops, and false flags, and a flashback where it presents what is described as gladio, opportunity, means, and motive, an alternative version of Waco. And I discovered this very, in the past couple of weeks, like honestly, probably a month ago, and I read through it. It was actually right before our Waco episode is when I found it, and I had started freaking out. and and so basically, this would be a great way to at least introduce this alternative theory. So the Waco drama was piloted by the '92 standoff at Ruby Ridge, obviously, which as served as a prequel of sorts to the Oklahoma City bombing in many ways, and that is how it's described by this very interesting Constantine archived piece, which again serves as a perfect introduction to this alternative theory. And so it says, in fact, we have since been fed a steady stream of lies about how Timothy McVeigh, another intelligence asset patsy who was so disturbed about the attacks on Ruby Ridge and Waco that he had to go and bomb a federal building just to, well, we simply cannot comprehend the evil souls of terrorists and their innocuous disguises leave us clueless. And in Oklahoma, it was the boy next door. And in Waco, it was the seductive preacher man. And so it's very interesting how this is presented. But basically, the way it goes is Bill and Hillary Clinton, right? As former Clinton advisor Dick Morris put it, Bill Clinton personally orchestrated the '93 Waco, Texas tragedy. Nevertheless, Janet Reno was apparently set up as the bad guy, her role allegedly posing a threat to her reappointment. And so, according to Dick Morris, Janet Reno made this cryptic remark, right? And this remark says it was regarding the Waco incident in connection with her reappointment for a second 4-year term. As she said, "If you don't appoint me, I'm going to tell the truth about Waco." And so that, of course, made people definitely pause, because what did she mean by the truth about Waco, obviously? And I found it interesting the way he described it. He said the general public was already as dazed as deer in the media headlights. What could she tell us that would have broken the spell? So interestingly, as we've mentioned before, that is where the 3 of the Bill Clinton's bodyguards during the '92 election campaign were engaged in the Waco operation as BATF officers, and were 3 of the 4 who were actually killed in the initial raid, right? And so the BATF investigative report, made public as an affidavit for the search warrant, was a key part of the official story about Waco. And so obviously this is where, you kind of have like this Janet Carino presenting the cult of personality in terms of Jonestown, where she provided the mass suicide narrative to the public as well, which is something I also think is very important to recognize. But by the way, I discovered that Timothy McVeigh, I didn't realize this, but in order to fulfill his military obligation, McVeigh signed on, obviously, with the Army National Guard in Buffalo. He lands this job as a security guard with Burns International Security. McVeigh was assigned to the night shift guarding the grounds of Calspin Research, right? Yeah, man. A defense contractor that conducts classified research in advanced aerospace rocketry and electronic warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And now that drew my attention instantly, obviously. And apparently Naval Research Lab attempts to meld neurons and chips. This is a study that was presented that says studies may produce army of zombies. And this plays into how all the Green Berets potentially went through this sort of strange psychological, conditioning program. And so it says future battles could be waged. This is such a crazy implication. And this is in a mainstream military, publication, and says that Naval Research Lab attempts were involved here. And so it's described as future battles could be waged with genetically engineered organisms such as rodents whose minds are controlled by computer chips engineered with living brain cells. The research, called hippocampal neuron patterning, grows live neurons on computer chips. This technology that alters neurons could potentially be used on people to create zombie armies. A senior fellow at the Brookings Institution said. So, of course, the think tanks, which, by the way, I believe it was the Council on Foreign Relations, seemed to have been blamed in having some sort of role in regard to a lot of this. But so it's
Did Koresh have military service? I don't recall that coming up or being part of the
Koresh?
narrative.
no,
Okay.
he never had military service. No,
Okay, because I mean, you have McVeigh. Obviously, he went special forces. We got
Right.
Westbrook. We got. I mean, we could go on for a while with all the different weird.
oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, what the Ruby Ridge guy was he? Was he a Green Beret? Well, I can't think of his
Yeah,
name.
he
right
was
now.
former Green Beret, and that was
Former
that
Green
was
Beret, yeah.
why Colonel Bo Gritz was brought up there
Mhm.
for the negotiations, because he was a former Green Beret commander, and so that's very interesting. And again, he's the guy who has the crazy Jonestown claims, as far as the Green Berets being ordered to shoot on sight all the remaining victims and survivors, and claiming that it was just a cleanup crew for MK Ultra, and that they were operating a covert clandestine MK Ultra black site in Guyana.
I wonder if any of Koresh's upper cadre were Green Beret. I don't know. Maybe
Hey,
you know
man.
that. I was like, because I'm thinking about that. I'm like, that would make sense, because that was
It
the
would
deal
make
with
sense.
that was the deal with Jonestown, is they had the Green Berets that were there, who were the guys running the security and like kind of seemingly running their own little child slaves, type of
Right.
whatever the heck they had to go in there. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and we know for a fact, obviously, that Delta Force commandos were on site during the final siege, right? And that was another thing, by the way. I heard that Wesley Clark potentially played some sort of role and originally, kind of like, he was tied potentially to Waco, as far as being involved because of these tanks coming from Fort Hood, and all these interesting, like Colonel Gerald Boykins being involved, right? And Peter Shoemaker, who was also a general who was the head of special forces, I think, at Fort Bragg at the time. And so they were all directly involved. They were there on site on the final day of the siege, right? And that alone is fascinating stuff, especially including the fact that you have you obviously have an international intelligence footprint there as well, where it seems to be an intelligence sharing operation where they have, like, they're in Mossad operatives, and you have Russian intelligence who are there, and they're all just taking notes in some sort of way, or providing their expertise and advice. And so this is interesting because that it goes to show, obviously, the use of military at Waco. If no one is aware of the fact of the Danforth report in context, right? There's an abstract that describes that in 1999, former Senator John Danforth is appointed by Attorney General Janet Reno as special counsel to investigate alleged illegal or improper behavior by government agencies before and during the Waco critical incident in 93. His final report to the Deputy Attorney General exculpated the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the FBI, and the armed forces regarding possible violations of posse comitatus law and related statutes. Now, after further examination of the Danforth report, obviously, in context, it's basically Danforth called for government openness and candor regarding Waco, but delivered an unequivocal defense of government forces instead, right? So that's something that's important to understand. And so I think that the best place to start to iron out a little bit more of these mind control claims would be, honestly, Jolly West and his potential connections here, because
Many such
apparently,
cases.
So I was unaware of the fact that you have, from the archives, right, the UCLA archives of Jolly West, there's a potential connection to Waco, because there was a Waco file. And shortly after he had entered University of Wisconsin, now again, his connection, this is all just alleged for Jolly. So it's difficult to tie him directly, other than this file that no one is allowed to really apparently see. And we just know he had a file on the Branch Davidians. And it's always been alleged that one of the persons he treated was later David Koresh at some point. And so shortly after he had entered University of Wisconsin, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. In the Army Specialized Training Program, he studied at the University of Iowa, University of Minnesota School of Medicine, from which he graduated in 1948. During his internship at the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic, he became familiar with Scientology, a cult he soon considered dangerous, right? When he has those run-ins. I don't know. That seems a little strange to me, but transferred to the U.S. Air Force Medical Corps, and 5 years later, he's appointed Chief of Psychiatry Service at the Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. So in this position, he studies U.S. pilots and veterans after they had experienced torture and brainwashing, obviously. And then it becomes chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California in L.A., so UCLA. And obviously he becomes director of its Neuropsychiatric Institute. Now, this is where he's alleged to have treated Charles Manson, Sirhan, and later David Koresh. And so that, to me, knowing already his direct affiliation with Tim McVeigh, I'm not at all shocked that would be a possibility. And then you consider this from the archives, Children of God cult, these files from Dr. Louis Jolyon West's collection. It says MK Ultra researcher Dr. Louis Jolyon West spent years heading organizations related to cults like the Cult Awareness Network and Center for the Study of New Religions. After the Waco incident involving the Branch Davidians and David Koresh, the notorious child abuse cult that Dr. Ruth Wangerin has suggested may have ties to the CIA, broke their years of media silence and reached out to, among others, UCLA Dr. West, right? So the professor at the Neuropsychiatric Institute. So in my mind, you're just witnessing a further connection that he potentially played here with in regard to if there was actually, right, a connection to Jolly West and the Branch Davidians, and the allegations that I've always seen that he treated David Koresh, then we have a little bit more of a tangible thread that we can pull on there, and hopefully I can discover something more credible at a later point. But so beyond that, man, I think the best place for us is the Wiltshire Report, because that's really the main crux of what I wanted to talk about. It's basically the core issue, because to me it draws in all the usual suspects. You have Paul Wiltshire, right, who we'll get into. He's this attorney who represents these two whistleblowers, and who are CIA covert operatives, and this all ties in this individual named Gunther Russbacher, the CIA operative, which discusses being George Bush's pilot in the infamous October surprise scandal, and talks about Danny Casalero's octopus and BCCI being involved. So the Bank of International Bank of Credit and Commerce, obviously. So this all begins with Paul Wiltshire writing these letters. Well, honestly, it's such a profound story. I'm discovering now that this is like, brother, this is deep as hell, honestly, when it gets down to it. And you could legitimately read multiple books on this specific subject alone. But so as I mentioned to you, and I mentioned this to the guys on NDS the other day as well. So Paul Wiltshire, right, claims that in the Wiltshire Report that he sends to Janet Reno. First of all, keep in mind, Paul Wiltshire, lawyer to the whistleblowers Rodney Stitch and Gunter Karl Russbacher. Wiltshire dies in these strange, disputed circumstances a month, 3 weeks after writing this letter to then new U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno, alleging that the CIA was killing people to cover up mind control experiments, and that the Waco incident was one of these events, which he directly parallels to that of Jonestown, which of course collaborates and corroborates and at least provides some sort of credibility to that of the theory that Bo Gritz was mentioning in regard to Jonestown, right? They took all these leftover loose ends from the CIA Montreal experiments for MK Ultra in Canada and just took them down to Guyana and added them to the body count, right? And it was a very convenient way to tie off loose ends. And so it gets very interesting because he had apparently, obviously, if you're the death of Paul Wiltshire, we'll have to get into that because it's very strange. He obviously was moved, right? He had been dead for weeks and was obviously killed elsewhere. Rigor mortis had definitely set in. He was brought back to his apartment after, and the CIA operative Gunther Russbacher actually put it in descriptive terms. He says he knows exactly how Paul Wiltshire was murdered, and he knows the make and model of the vehicle that he was put in the trunk of after he was drugged, after being beaten in his interrogation, in regard to all of these various profits that were being laundered through the BCCI, right, at the time, right, which can consider that with Iran-Contra and everything else playing out. Danny Castellero's just been murdered, and Paul Wiltshire saying, "I know more than he did." Right, and he legitimately says this. He said, "I know more than Danny Castellero knew about this octopus," and he said, "My life is in danger." And the same about Russbacher, this Gunther Russbacher. He's a CIA black, clandestine operative working undercover, and as he realizes that members of his covert operational group were being targeted for assassination, right? Because things were being leaked about the October surprise that was happening, which he apparently piloted the flight and gives the list of individuals once a helicopter crash happens, and he goes, "Holy shit, I was supposed to be killed." And he talks about how, okay, well, now I'm going to blow the whistle. And he inevitably gets brought up on charges, right? And as being a part of this FBI sting. It's so crazy, man. And so again, this is something that, like I when you called me earlier, I was pretty much I was alluding to the fact that I've discovered something that I think is far more credible, providing an alternative theory that I think is plausible as hell and would fill in a lot of the holes in the narrative in my mind. But to lay out the bare bones of it, right? It's interesting, and I got a hold of actually the original expose and the apparent 3-part Wiltshire report that was sent to Attorney General Janet Reno, which is very interesting. But by the way, I found this so crazy. Did you know that Dr. Louis Jolyon West was that he was actually in 1989, that very cult awareness network that I think has direct connections tying into Waco and the LMI, right? Where allegedly, based on the Wiltshire report, the LMI is the institution where they were potentially prior programmed as far as the 6 individuals within Koresh's inner circle and things of that nature. So in 89, the Cult Awareness Network awarded West its highest honor, the Leo J. Ryan Award, for extraordinary courage, tenacity, and perseverance in the battle against tyranny over the mind of man.
The Leo Ryan, wow, what a fucking slap.
Talk
in the
about
face.
salt in the wound, right?
Yeah,
Like,
jeez. I think they're a little
holy
salty
shit.
about him still.
They fucking hated him. Like that's the most obvious thing in my mind. I mean, honestly. But when you talk about Waco weirdness, Walter Bauert from that very Operation Mind Control that Tim Tuttle had sent over, right? There's a chapter. It's chapter 33, by the way. I find that very interesting, but who knows? Could just be chapter 33. So it says the fire at Waco from Operation Mind Control's research edition. So this is crazy. Perhaps not since the Reichstag fire in Nazi Germany have flames leaped so visibly into the pages of history. The flames in both Waco and the Reichstag fires were fueled by mind control. At least that's the impression you get when you read Attorney Paul D. Wilcher's letter to Attorney General Janet Reno, dated May 21st, 1993. The letter begins with no salutation. The phone numbers of Miss Reno, Justice Department Communications Director Carl Stem, Appointments Secretary Melissa Mueller, Assistant Attorney General Richard Scruggs, and James Kramarczyk, Special Ops CIA. With a typical lawyerly lack of style, the letter begins. Vital new information concerning the conflagration at David Koresh's Branch Davidian compound, quote, ranch apocalypse outside Waco, Texas on Monday, April 19th, 1993, which is now being kept from you and covered up, i.e., that what happened was not a mass suicide, but rather a mass murder. The meaning and significance of this new information, particularly with respect to the Justice Department's ongoing Waco investigation and future indictments and prosecutions, i.e., you are headed totally in the wrong direction. Because Bush administration holdovers in the Justice Department, along with others tied to the CIA, are preventing you from ever learning the truth about what actually happened in Waco. The extreme sensitivity of this information and my specific proposal as to how you should handle it, the lives of key participants, other witnesses, and even myself are now in grave danger as a result of my passing this information on to you. If you let this information fall into the hands of the wrong persons, some or all of those who know the truth about Waco and are now prepared to come forward and testify could well be silenced, i.e., murdered in the very near future. And the extreme importance of this information to the overall quality of justice under the Clinton administration, to your own place in history as Attorney General, and to President Clinton's very life and personal safety, this information, if handled in the manner I've spelled out in detail below, presents you and President Clinton with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expose, confront, and hopefully root out much of the system-wide corruption which has been at the core of the federal government for at least the past 30 years. Now, he says, the purpose of this letter is for me to deliver to you extremely sensitive information about the deaths of the 86 men and women and children who perished at the Branch Davidian compound on Monday, April 19th, 1993, and the truth about how it all happened. But even more important, my purpose here is to demonstrate how the Waco tragedy fits into a much bigger and far uglier picture, and to present my specific detailed plan as to how you should attack the overall problem at its root causes. Now, it's interesting because the subject of mind control is introduced on page 4 when Wilcher writes, David Koresh had an extensive CIA background. He was known in CIA circles as a sleeper, someone who had been subjected to extensive CIA mind control training and programming. Wilcher said that it was not a coincidence that all these events were occurring in or near Waco, Texas, since Waco is a major center for such CIA mind control experimentation and programming, with much of this activity occurring at the CIA's Leadership Management Institute in Waco, the LMI. Wilcher pointed out that similar CIA-sponsored cults are located across the country, including such places as Salt Lake City, Utah, Provo, Utah, Logan, Utah, Boise, Idaho, and San Francisco, California. And that, which, by the way, is very overwhelmingly represented by modern day process groups, right? The Best Friends, all the strange, weird Mormon connections to Utah, right? Which obviously at one point played into even Watergate, which I felt was hilarious. But yeah, so it becomes very interesting because obviously it begins to describe that one or all of these other cults can likewise explode onto the front pages of the press at any time the CIA deems appropriate in order to accomplish its predetermined, hidden, right-wing political agenda. Now, this is according to Wilcher, obviously. So Wilcher indicated to Reno that he knew who had committed the murders, who had ordered them, and who had been part of the chain of command. He then lapsed into more of kind of reciting the disciplinary rules and codes of professional responsibility from the American Bar Foundation. But this is where it becomes very interesting. Thoroughly covering the details of the lies told by government employees at Waco, Wiltshire wrapped up the motivational part of his argument and launched into a background briefing on events leading to the February 28th raid on the Davidian compound. To begin, Vernon Wayne Howell, also known as David Koresh, had connections to the CIA. Indeed, he and 6 of the men in his inner circle were known among CIA covert operatives as sleepers, persons whom the agency had performed mind control experiments on and who had been pre-programmed to carry out specific pieces of CIA dirty business, is the way he puts it in quotes.
Monarch, baby.
At some point in the future, once a specific cue or signal was given to them by their contact persons or handlers within the agency. Third, David Koresh was very much like Reverend Jim Jones in that he too was a, quote, gangster who used a Bible instead of a gun. In a note, Wiltshire remarked, Jonestown was not a mass suicide any more than Waco was. Instead, Jonestown, like Waco, was a mass murder. In order to guarantee that there would be no survivors to tell about the CIA's extensive mind control experiments, which had been performed on those mostly black victims in Guyana. Fourth, David Koresh was also very much like Charles Manson, in that he, Jones, and Manson all demanded and received total domination over and total submission from all of the men, women, and children in his group. And like the Reverend Jim Jones and Charles Manson and David Koresh, likewise had received much of his mind control training at the hands of the CIA and was a product of their system. In other words, David Koresh may have been what most people would consider a thoroughly and mentally disturbed megalomaniac, but he was the CIA's megalomaniac, or at least someone they were all too happy to use for their devious right-wing purposes if and when the opportunity ever presented itself. Indeed, David Koresh and these 6 other men in his inner circle had apparently been pre-programmed by the CIA to become on-cue Manchurian candidate assassins, apparently, who would effectively, essentially develop a weapon of some kind that he viewed would this is what he also explained too, because if you go through a lot of this, it's very strange. The CIA had obviously, one of the most important features of the mind control programming is the fact that you have critical segments of the subject's memory, including most or all of the programming experience itself. It basically self-destructs, right? It's erased from the subject's mind, and basically it's a memory alteration done at a subconscious, unconscious level. Right. And that's something that I think is difficult for people to understand. But this is, implanted false memories, things of that nature, are obviously playing out as well. And, you have obviously you also have these handlers utilizing the subconscious mind, in which you have, let's say, you just have these trigger mechanisms that I think it's important to understand, right? Is a huge part of how this actually fundamentally operates in the mind of the victim. But yeah, this is where we get into kind of if you listen to the wife of the CIA Office of Naval Intelligence operative Gunther Rossbacher, right? His wife, Raylan Allen Russbacher, right? She described a lot of this personally because she experienced basically his targeting essentially after he became willing to blow the whistle. And this is the individual who, again, as I said, CIA covert operative, Office of Naval Intelligence. He was the one who is described as being directly involved in the flight to Paris with President Bush Sr., right? George Bush Sr. And this is very interesting because obviously he explains specifically who was on the flight, right? And the chain of command as well. But the October surprise itself, Wiltshire cited his client Paul Wiltshire, cited his client Gunther Karl Russbacher, the CIA covert operative, Office of Naval Intelligence. So his client describes a lifelong covert operative for the CIA in the Office of Naval Intelligence, as far as Paul Wiltshire described his client, as the pilot of the flight that flew George Bush and others to Paris for a meeting with Iran's leaders during the 1980 election campaign. So Russbacher claimed to have flown Bush to France in a BAC 111 owned by the Saudi royal family. By Russbacher's recollection, the aircraft left from Andrews Air Force Base near 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 18th, rendezvoused over the Atlantic with a Grumman Gulfstream flown by Heinrich Rupp, and landed at Le Bourget Airport. Russbacher returned Bush to the United States in an SR-71, which landed at McGuire Air Force Base at 10:50 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. After dropping Bush off at McGuire, Russbacher continued alone to Andrews Air Force Base. So this is interesting as well, because if you look at persons who Russbacher alleged to be on the flight to Paris, it included William Casey, future CIA director at the time, Donald Gregg, CIA official, Robert
Is it
Gates.
Casey or Colby that got fucking murdered or got like clearly got offed?
I
You
think
remember?
it was Casey, the one that was in the boat that
Yeah.
that was suspiciously killed.
There's William
Mhm.
Casey and there's William Colby, so I just always mix the two up.
I know
so
I
never
always
was who.
forget as well, because I conflate both of them together as well, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was Casey.
Mhm.
But
And he's the
but
same
he
one
was,
who had that who had the quote to John DeCamp, I think, like a month or less prior to the bombing,
Mhm.
about like how the militia will be the next biggest thing. It was murder
It
death
was
kills thing
Colby.
was just Colby.
Okay.
Okay, whatever.
All right.
We're wrong
Sounds
then.
good,
so.
buddy.
All right.
Well,
that
what's
means
the
nothing.
difference?
All the
Yeah.
same. They all glow
Right.
the same.
But yeah, I did find it interesting that Robert Gates was among the group as well, because he's a future CIA director. You have Earl Bryan, CIA agent, credited by Wiltshire with stealing the Inslaw Promise software. By the way, he was on the flight. You
Checks
have
out.
Yeah, I mean, you have quite a few, around 5 Navy SEALs, around 5 Secret Service agents, an additional congressman who's unnamed. You have John Hines, Republican senator, John Tower, Republican senator, Robert Byrd, Democratic senator. There's a not a huge list, but let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's about 12 people, right?
A
But
key
still,
cadre.
yeah, definitely an elite cadre of individuals who most of them would be future CIA directors, which is, very important, I think, to understand if this is a legitimate. In my mind, everything checks out. Again, this is an individual who you have to consider what happened in terms of the cover-up during Iran-Contra, the death of Danny Castellero. This, in my mind, would fall perfectly in line with the octopus. So, basically, Russbacher alleged to be involved in the ground level operation, right? Wiltshire alleges that Hines, this individual, was murdered in order to keep him quiet, right? So one of the people who was actually on the flight was murdered in order to keep him quiet. John Hines, the Republican senator. So I haven't yet looked up his death or the suspicious causes, but Wiltshire alleges that the senator was murdered in order to keep him quiet about the October surprise. And Hines's widow, Teresa Hines, she inevitably married the Skull and Bonesman John Kerry, which I found very strange. But in '92, Gunter Russbacher was sentenced to 21 years in prison for financial crimes. Russbacher's wife, Raylene, alleges that he had been a key figure in the arms for drugs scandal under the name Emery J. Pedden, and that this sounds a lot like Barry Seal in a similar way. And that at the time of his arrest in '89, he was living in a CIA safe house, and his office was at the Langley, Virginia CIA headquarters. All of the evidence of Gunther's ties to the intelligence community were effectively procured by the FBI after his apprehension, And in February of 93, Raelian would claim to have provided Congress with the cockpit video from the SR-71 during the return flight, where, as far as the hostage crisis is concerned, with George Bush Sr. in the October surprise. So she also
Did they just say
claimed,
they took an SR-71 back? Is that what they're saying?
apparently from one of the locations on the trip back, they switched to an SR-71. Yeah.
I maybe I'm wrong, but I don't feel like that's a thing that carries a large amount of people. I feel like maybe I'm wrong,
But there aren't
yeah.
a lot of people. It seems like the trip to France, obviously 7,000 or 4,000 miles. I mean, later models of the original BAC 111, this lacks the range to fly across the Atlantic, and so at least allegedly. So that does bring in some interesting ideas about how this could have happened, but also considering, I'm not sure how the flight actually,
It's
was
dual seats. There's 2 seats in it, so that's weird. Like he would have to be like specifically.
Oh, but he said the return flight was just, he was bringing one passenger, essentially what was happening, right? So yeah, effectively they had switched planes to
SR-71,
this
yeah.
SR-71 from the original, because let's see, General Maxwell Taylor provided the SR-71, and Colonel de Maurentius, who photographed Bush entering the SR-71.
Just seems way too excessive just for personal use.
Right. But the
Yeah.
air traffic controller at Andrews Air Force Base apparently corroborated this. The crew of a tanker, of a KC-135 tanker, refueled the SR-71 in the air. So this is all apparently legitimate, as far as it's somehow, been corroborated. It looks as if it has been. And then,
Yeah. I just
and
haven't
so-
heard them being used for passenger purposes all that much. I'm like, who
not the
fuck would use it?
SR-71,
Yeah,
not
I'm what
like
the
I
fuck?
said.
Yeah.
Like I said, he claims that Russbacher returned Bush to the United States in an SR-71, which landed at McGuire Air Force Base at 10:50 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So
All right.
that's the alleged claim. And let's see. In February 93, his wife, Russbacher's wife, the alleged pilot's wife, Raylene. Oh shit, it's probably Raylene.
Yeah.
Oh shit, that's hilarious. So she claims to have provided Congress with that cockpit video, right? Which of the returning flight in the SR-71. So that is another aspect of the apparent corroboration. But she also claimed that the CIA had attempted to frame her and Smith for an assassination attempt on Bush in October 29th, apparently. And over 50 CIA operatives, their wives and families, were allegedly killed in an attempt by the Robert Gates faction of the CIA to cover its tracks before Clinton's team came into power. And this could be a window into power struggles in D.C. and the internal kind of criminal syndicate and how they really function in some sort of way, because it couldn't possibly be that they're all on board with the same exact agenda. You would have to imagine warring factions playing out.
Mhm.
That's typically the way organized crime function in the first place. And so yeah, and basically it was alleged that she had survived 4 assassination attempts between October 30th and December 25th, and that the enemy camp is placed squarely within the Council of Foreign Relations. And that was at the very least a claim that his wife had made. And if you consider how Paul Wiltshire, who is the original attorney for Gunter Russbacher, right? He died in a very strange way when he tried to get the 3-part report, the Wiltshire report, to Janet Reno, and that death again is something that's worth understanding. But first of all, you have to realize what Gunther Russbacher had told Paul Wiltshire whenever he contacted him, which is exactly what had happened, is that he had been tipped off on Russbacher's existence as a covert operative just based on his investigation practices in general and who he had come into contact with. He's given this tip. He follows up with Gunter Russbacher, and basically after a long conversations, open-ended conversations with Russbacher, he's told during the Waco. Well, first of all, he's told all about the October surprise. So he had every single last aspect of the details playing into the October surprise, the individual names involved, and that he then came back and debriefed, the task force, the October surprise task force, which unfortunately, apparently, like most Senate and House task forces, the October surprise was a complete whitewash, as all the rest were. And so this is where you have the wife of this former Office of Naval Intelligence operative, Gunther Russbacher, claiming that during the Waco siege, Gunther started telling her and Paul Wiltshire about the mind control experiments that were going on inside the compound at Waco. At first, Gunther compared the experiment with Jonestown, but then he said that this one was a different kind. I can still remember the night before the compound was burned. This is the wife of Russbacher. She says, Raylene, I was in hiding on top of a mountain in a small town in Ohio. Another hit order had been put out on me, and the FBI was looking for me. I had arranged to call Paul at exactly 8 p.m. Gunther was going to call Paul from prison, right? Because Gunther Russbacher had already been brought up on federal charges because he became willing to blow the whistle. This is very interesting. By the way, that fits perfectly with what Rakana Shuto claimed happened to him. He was running black budget covert operations domestically with the CIA, and that essentially he was hung out to dry because he had become willing to name certain co-conspirators, and due to that fact, right, they essentially damaged his credibility and assassinated his character, and he wasn't all that of a bright and shining ethical standard in the first place. Right, so it really wasn't all that difficult if you're running drugs domestically for the U.S. Intelligence apparatus. But yeah, anyway, so Gunther, and it's interesting because Gunther Russbacher starts explaining what was happening with these covert operations at Waco, and basically he kind of outlines exactly what was taking place, and essentially he says that yes, the Waco sleepers had somehow been triggered, and this is where you kind of get into a little bit more of the details of what could have potentially been happening at the Branch Davidian complex. So it looks as if, and this is according to, again, this is Raylene, right? And she's explaining how the Davidian group was created to perform a terrorist act similar to the sarin gas that was released in the Japanese subway by the Aum Shinrikyo cult, right? So again, this is part of the Wiltshire report. Randy Weaver's listed in the Wiltshire report of the Ruby Ridge incident as being a control subject that ended up out of control, and Russbacher never provided any further information on Randy Weaver being a potential, Manchurian, or at the very least being involved with this very same operation. So Russbacher introduced Wiltshire to members of his SEAL team. These men and others are the government employees who gave Paul Wiltshire the information he put into the 100-page letter he wrote to Attorney General Janet Reno. So in the letter, he explains that various government mind control experiments, obviously, and he attempts to obviously walk us through a lot of the details of how this is even possible in the first place. And this is what he was trying to explain to Janet Reno, although he didn't realize Janet Reno wasn't really a good faith actor in the first place. She very much became compromised if she wasn't to begin with, but he tried to at the very least give her some sort of background on mind control. So it gets even crazier because apparently, according to Raylene Russbacher, Wiltshire was told that something had gone wrong at Waco. the sleepers were waking up from their programming. Not only were they waking up, one or more of them had been accidentally triggered. The Waco sleepers were programmed to make and deliver a biological or chemical device that could kill everyone in a city the size of Oklahoma City or Houston. Information received by their handlers stated the program had been accidentally triggered and the 7 sleepers had started building the device. So this is what Russbacher actually, Gunther Russbacher had actually told to Paul Wiltshire. And so it looks like Paul Wiltshire was not told about this mission, right? As far as the Waco sleepers had been, as far as he was not told about the mission the Waco sleepers had been prepared to carry out in terms of what was this device for, right? That's the main point. And so, meaning, of course, the primary source of Gunther Russbacher, by the way, is obviously he's the primary source in the Wiltshire report. And so this is when the outline from this chemical device of the sleepers that they were constructing and alluded to and how it might have been used was, at the very least, it was somewhat alluded to, but not in real detail. So Wiltshire was not told that the sleepers had accidentally been triggered, but they were building a chemical device which they were planning on using on Oklahoma City. The sleepers had been programmed many years before. In the ensuing time, it was discovered that the wind currents in Oklahoma City would have dispersed the chemicals so that it would have been rendered ineffective. In other words, it would not have killed the massive number of people that needed to be killed to send a message to the American people. The chemical device, which the 7 sleepers were in the process of constructing, could have killed up to 350,000 people. That is the allegation, which every agency or department was in control of the sleepers, or whichever agency or department was in control of the sleepers in this project, made the determination that Houston would be a better target than Oklahoma City. So, in other words, more people would have been killed, and the 7 sleepers had not yet been recalled, apparently, as far as their programming was concerned. And so they apparently hadn't been recalled and reprogrammed with the new instructions, such as dates and locations. So apparently that is how they actually can follow through with a lot of this these potential kind of sleeper cells that are conveniently stationed in controlled environments. Because that's again what the theoretical outline here is that this could potentially be what is happening, right? Mm-hmm. Is that you have sleeper cells that are stationed to condition groups of individual citizens, let's say, in a controlled environment, right? Where you can kind of conduct this very sophisticated level of research. And you wonder why all of these interesting, how many, right? The international footprint at Waco was very strange, to say the least. And so according to this Office of Naval Intelligence CIA operative, Gunther Russbacher, there was another message being sent. Russbacher once stated that Randy Weaver was also a programmed sleeper and indicated that Vicky Weaver had somehow deactivated Randy's programming. Russbacher seemed to imply that the attack on Ruby Ridge was intended to send a message not only to the Patriot community, but to all sleepers from the Special Forces community. Some of these sleepers realized they had been programmed and were trying to find the sleeper program and deactivate it themselves. Russbacher said this was happening in some of the men who had been programmed during the Vietnam War as well. So he's claiming that during Phoenix, that all of these sleepers began to wake up to their prior programming and reject it. And then, knowing in hindsight what had occurred, were effectively attempting to reprogram themselves in some very strange way. And so that, I'm telling you, man, this is all something that I'm presenting this the best that I can because this is something that I've just recently discovered, and it's also very interesting. I'm trying to figure out what's most important to present, but it's like with the amount of time we have left, it's basically impossible to do so.
Yeah,
but
I think I mean, obviously, if there's, I think we've really kind of, seems to me at least, obviously you have a better grip on this material, but it seems like we kind of hit the main beats and like kind of what we're getting at. Real quick before
Well,
we do move on, real quick, I do have a question from, and it ties into kind of where we're at right now, from one of my listeners. That's actually from Tim Tuttle. And I guess he was obviously, it seems like he knew ahead of time that you were going to touch on the David and his 6 followers being sleeper agents. But the key question he asked is how much weight does he put into it? Now, like if you are to analyze this this theory that's being put out by the Wiltshire report, how do you judge this?
So I'm beginning to find out.
Is there any reason to look at this with dubious eyes aside from the fact that it's crazy claims, or not really?
Well, I think that the BCCI, connection that's being provided here, even what I have just discovered about Arliss Perry's husband, Bruce Perry, being involved as the psychiatrist who gave the children their psychiatric, basically there was a psychiatric profile, and let me pull up Bruce, because he was in charge of treating the children at Waco. This is so crazy, man. And Bruce Paddock, to me, is not Bruce Paddock, Jesus. I'm going to the Vegas shooting, my bad. No, Bruce Perry. That's Arliss Perry, who was ritually murdered on the on the UC Berkeley campus. And it's a very crazy story. It's October 1974, and Bruce Perry's involved. He's found by the authorities and covered in blood. They claim it's not his blood. I think Stephen Crawford's involved, the security guard on the campus that night, but inevitably it's tied directly back to the Process Church of the Final Judgment and a ritualistic occult murder that very much she had been. Apparently, she was from North Dakota. David Berkowitz himself from Son of Sam Murders even wrote about how Arliss Perry's murder was ritualistically, obviously, it was a ritual practice, and it was honestly just a blood ritual inside of a chapel as well, with every single aspect of the crime scene being staged, a candle inserted into her vagina, like her legs being put in at a strange, specific angle, where her jeans were draped over her by the perpetrator in that very same angle, with an ice pick shoved into the back of her head, but she didn't show signs of sexual abuse. It was very other than obviously the candle and those the strange again, the fact of the matter is that you have a direct tie-in to Arliss Perry's husband, Bruce Perry, happened to be being the psychiatrist involved in being in charge of treating the children at Waco. And so that alone made me think, is this potentially, could we have some sort of wider network playing out here in some Gladio style terms, right? Where this is more realistic than you would think. And I believe that at this point, after reading into this, I think the ultimate thread is Paul Wiltshire and the Wiltshire report. And I believe that Gunther Russbacher was the pilot that day. I think that he can tie in the October surprise and Danny Castellero's octopus to the BCCI scandal that kind of proves out how Iran-Contra were laundering and money at the time, and drugs and many other things, clandestine operations in general. And but it's more than that as well, right? Because you have to consider the actual Wiltshire report itself. They talk about how essentially there's this crazy part about how basically how David Koresh could have, potentially actually utilized mind control techniques. It says one reason why Koresh was so skilled in controlling his followers, right? And it goes into, this is number 19 in the 93 report sent to Janet Reno, the original version. It's a crazy, but this is what it looks like, right? And it basically highlights one reason was right, that he was so skilled in controlling his followers. And basically, that was, and subjugating the minds and wills of his followers, was that he and these 6 men in his inner circle had been through such intensive and total mind control programming themselves. But once the CIA had trained these pre-programmed robot assassins, it felt it could not just wind them up and let them go. It had to keep a careful watch over them. And if push came to shove, to take them out, to kill them. If the CIA ever felt that Koresh and his 6 fellow sleepers could no longer be counted on to carry out their pre-assigned mission at some date in the future, or as ultimately occurred, if there was any danger that they might someday testify in a court of law or otherwise be able to expose the public, as far as to the public, to the real truth about the CIA's mind control operations, I think that alone is at the very least worth identifying as a realistic possibility, right?
Yeah.
But when you legitimately have a part of the Wiltshire report being, that this was, a lot of this had to do obviously with, you're considering DC, the winds of power shifting. Obviously, you have transitioning in the as far as the executive administration and power at the time, and I think that always matters as far as covert operations and getting the green light. So yeah, you have layered operations to Waco. Obviously, the ATF wanted to be involved so they could get some more funding. 100%. You had so many different aspects of it playing out. But to rule out the legitimacy and realistic potential of a covert operation being conducted domestically for some sort of let's say sleeper cell, but test group, under the perfect circumstances, just like a Jonestown, where not only, again, you have Sarah McClendon, she's part of the White House press office right at the time, and she's legitimately she's worried about Paul Wiltshire because he was actually had press credentials at that time, right? Was legitimate. Like, he was a corroborated journalist before he was found dead in one of the craziest examples you could ever discover. So this is the very beginning. Why Waco, it says. And this alone, we could probably end with this because there's just so much. It's just too much, you know what I mean?
For
And
sure, yeah.
yeah, and so check this out. So hours before, you just have to consider the fact that this is basically the best way to kind of in a coherent and let's say just comprehensive chronological way, like set out a little bit of what the Wiltshire report is without having to read through it all. It obviously says that Paul Wiltshire, right, and a small group there, because there's a death that's obviously affiliated because of Paul Wiltshire being found dead. And so Marion Kidding, as a friend, expressed concern about Wiltshire's sudden disappearance. Wiltshire worked closely with Gunther Russbacher, obtaining hours, taped conversation about covert CIA operations, including the October surprise, INSLAW, BCCI, and other covert activities. Russbacher sent copies of the 55 tapes in addition to the hundreds of hours so in addition, shortly before his death, Wiltshire had obtained the names of many U.S. congressmen who had been bribed by BCCI. Wiltshire was a threat to Justice Department officials, federal judges, members of Congress, and other U.S. officials. Marion Kindig, a friend of Wiltshire, went to his apartment a couple of days earlier and got no answer when she rang the doorbell. She rang an adjacent apartment seeking to have the person signal the front door to open. She wanted to leave a package on Wiltshire's doorknob. So this is how his body is discovered, basically. But Sarah McClendon asked the Washington police to go to Wiltshire's apartments to check on his safety, stating that several friends had not seen Wiltshire for the past 2 weeks and that they feared foul play. The police refused to do so. And it was also described, as I had read earlier, as if they didn't want to get involved in any real way, which makes sense based on the military intelligence infiltration of the local Metropolitan DC Police Department. But either way, so he's discovered dead. and it's very, very strange. And the better way to expose the details of that, because you actually have Russbacher himself, the actual CIA ONI operative. He explains exactly what happened to this individual he provided all the information to, Paul Wiltshire. And this is what he has to say. Gunther Russbacher releases information detailing the last hours of Paul Wiltshire, how Paul Wiltshire was murdered. Paul was picked up at his apartment, taken to Vienna, Virginia, where he was questioned as to the Bush, Webster, and Carter account with London SWBCCI. He was questioned for approximately 2 hours, at which time he was fed. At 3:40 p.m. on the 18th of June, he was administered 0.025 milligrams of Curare via DSMO as a stabilizer. It was applied to the coating of the Pepsi bottle. At point of death, he was beaten to the face to make it look like a mugging. Now, this is coming from Gunther Russbacher, the alleged ONI CIA operative who was running covert operations, drug smuggling for the Iran-Contra network, the pilot that ran the October surprise, who effectively exposed the BCCI, connection. This is all what he has to say, obviously, in his attempt to expose this wider network, but also in his attempt to corroborate the legitimacy and credibility of Paul Wiltshire himself, who was the attorney who sought him out and attempted to expose, the truth in regard to what at least potentially could be the truth in regard to a covert clandestine operation being exposed, right? And so this is, by the way, he claims that he was also poisoned, right? When he went to, which I found interesting, Offutt Air Force Base, right? So he goes to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, where they're running Project Monarch. And he claims, at least Gunther Russbacher, he had told Paul Wiltshire that when he went there with these key CIA operatives and very high-level officials within the intelligence apparatus, that he basically tells him that he was poisoned, right? I believe it was Russbacher that was poisoned, or maybe it was Russbacher had brought Paul Wiltshire to this event. Again, I've just recently been very much exposed to this light of interest, but from the story that I'm recalling from my recent memory, yeah, it was one of the two. But either way, one of the two were poisoned while they were meeting with the director of the CIA at Offutt Air Force Base. And I believe it actually was Paul Wiltshire, now that I'm remembering, because I'm pretty sure the entire what had happened was that the head of the CIA had directly told the individual who presented the drinks to the table of Gunther Russbacher and Paul Wiltshire that he needed Paul Wiltshire to have a long sleep. And so effectively that meant you need to drug him so I can have a private conversation with Gunther Russbacher without this attorney who's clearly attempting to pry into a lot of these dealings. Now I'm trying to, again, I'll fundamentally kind of affiliate myself with far more of these details over time. But
I really do got to get out of here. And
no,
I do think
we're
at a good spot. So
I'll summarize this, brother. I'm sorry, but basically at the point of death, the point being Gunther Russbacher released the information detailing the last hours of Paul Wiltshire. He says at the point of death, he was beaten to the face to make it look like a mugging. He was held in the trunk of a white and gray Ford Victoria with Maryland plates. He was taken to his apartment. He was in a rigor mortis at the time, already placed on the toilet. He had already emptied his bowels at death in another location. The bowel was removed and disappeared. Autopsy serology will show this Curare DMSO in the cardiovascular sac, peridinum, I believe, peridinum. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but that was what he was claiming would be discovered. And so there's a Chicago judge which apparently died in the very same way, right, that Wiltshire did, Judge Parsons, which was apparently being primed and ready to accept a civil RICO filing in regard to this very same matter, which was scheduled for filing on June I believe it was June 30th, 93. And then all of the documents disappeared after the fact. So several others, of course, died, and they were claiming up to 50 some odd, covert operatives were effectively targeted and assassinated throughout the course of this, attempted exposure. And so the primary cause of death, according to Gunther Russbacher, Bush Russbacher video of the return flight from Paris in the SR-71. They say that was a huge factor. Documents of BCCI and these financial, right? Obviously, these proof positive that there's clearly a covert money laundering operation facilitating these black budget, funds and again the overall intelligence apparatus that's being obviously Gladio in my mind. But anyway, audio tapes of interviews by CIA covert operatives, over 65 tapes, 92 hours of which were all effectively destroyed or disappeared. And Waco and the CIA, Delta Force, all involved, obviously. So, yeah.
All right. Well, with that, Austin, let them know where they can find
far
you.
more, buddy, but
yeah, I know there's plenty, but I do really get out of here. So I'm sorry to keep
I'm not
it
trying
tight,
to keep you, man.
but we could easily make this at least a 2-part episode.
I'm telling you.
But to keep it curt and to keep it, I think we covered relevant information. We left people interested. I'm sure we'll spurg on this and other times in one of our shows.
Oh, I'm
going to
talk
Austin,
about it at some point. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But with that, Austin, let them know where they can find you, and we're gonna get out of here. I gotta get going. So
that sounds good, buddy.
Yeah.
Sorry to keep you, man.
No, you're
you
good.
already know. I tried to do my best as far as, again, I couldn't figure out the best way to chronologically organize a lot of this because it's so much that I'm kind of spiraling on in a very brief amount of time. But still, it's something worthwhile in examining and re-examining and reflecting upon, because I do think that this alternative theory provides a far more plausibility than I originally would have ever considered, and so, yeah. You guys already know you can support me if you would like to at my Patreon, and that's patreon.com/the Underclass Podcast. Then basically best place to follow me at the Underclass Podcast on Instagram or at Theater Thug AWP on Twitter. And yeah, the Underclass Podcast, man. You know this. Love you, brother.
Love you too, man. For those who want to support what I'm doing over here, leave a like, share, subscribe, comment. Leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify. All those actions help out a lot. You can also follow me on Twitter at TowerGangJose. That helps. I mean, just to boost my follower count. Also, it helps too in that you can tag me in content that you would like to see me cover. And this is typically probably well over somewhere in the realm of half the content on my morning show is just stuff that people tag me on that I cover there. And also for those who want to directly support the show, the best way to do that is patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. The lowest level is $2. That gives you access to early episodes just like this one right here. You'll have got it weeks earlier than the public. Also, you can get an ad-free RSS feed and also get preference for me and Austin's weekly live call-in show, which is on Tuesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Also, my highest level in my Patreon, I read them off every episode. Those are my Patreon sponsors. I have my co-host on Tower Gang, at Tower Gang Toad, also at Abrogate D's, at ZLVREACK, at _Infinzeal, Tim Tuttle, at Jolly Cleeble, Will Bell's Delicious Blueberry Rabbit Eye Wine, and then big fan of show, Tori May, then at INWARD Lover. Appreciate you guys for supporting the show. Really helps out with what I'm doing over here, and so that I can prioritize trying to put out a good show for you guys. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Appreciate everyone who watched, and I'm looking forward. Me and Austin are about to start a Dutro series, so keep an eye out for that. And we are out.